Hi, welcome back to another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. So as usual, I'm going to talk about the plot of the novel first and then my review. So there will be spoilers. So Pawn of Prophecy is the first in what's known as the Belgariad series. There's also a sequel series called The Malorian, and these are actually pretty well-known fantasy novels. They were first written, I think this first one was published in 1982. Yeah, 1982. And so this series is almost 40 years old. This particular book was printed in 1990, so this thing's almost 30 years old. I got these from my grandparents when they were moving, and I'm trying really hard not to break them. I'm trying to treat them very gently. But yeah, these were very popular fantasy novels several years ago, and a lot of people still remember these really fondly, and I can definitely see why. So this, it almost feels like it's sort of a transitionary fantasy type novel. It's not as grand in some respects as maybe like the Lord of the Rings, but it's not as like graphic or intense as like Game of Thrones or some of the other fantasy novels you have. It's very, I don't know if there's a thing called middle fantasy or mid fantasy, but that's kind of what I'd classify this as. There's not like different races as far as like elves and dwarves go. There's lots of different, they call them different races, but they're all just like different types of humans, basically. And there's magic, but it's not super prevalent. And it's a very kind of down-to-earth type thing. So it's definitely very interesting. You can definitely see it as a piece that was a big transitionary piece in the fantasy landscape. So the actual plot, the novel starts off with a prologue, which a lot of these novels do. Even fantasy novels today will have prologues, but it's basically an overview of kind of the history of this world and talking about the gods. And to break it down very simply, there was this one god who was kind of a loner, but he taught some humans, and he also created this thing called the orb. And it could basically do anything. Whatever the wielder wanted it to do, it could do. However, you had to not have malice, I think, in your heart to be able to use it. Well, it's one evil god called Tarak really wanted this orb because he wanted power, and he stole it, and he used it, and it burned like half of his body. But even though he couldn't use it anymore because he would be killed if he did again, he still kept it, and he built a huge tower and a huge city around it. And then eventually the orb was stolen from him, and he has been trying to get it back ever since. And then before, like a few thousand years before the current events of the story, he was trying to get it back, and he was very badly injured, and is basically he didn't die only because he's a god, but he's basically in a permanent sleep until he is awakened by one of his people, one of the people who wants to awaken him. And so basically the other thing you have to know is that the person who was able to actually hold the orb, because he was pure of heart and all this, and he's one of the people who went and stole this orb back, it is now determined that his line will be the protectors of this orb, and they're the only ones who can wield it safely and all that. And now at this day and age, that line has pretty much been it's thought to have been wiped out. And you find out, of course, that's not the case, because this is a typical chosen one narrative. The kid in here is the chosen one. I mean, that's not even a spoiler. I mean, I know I'm spoiling the story, but it's not even a spoiler. You can tell as soon as you read the thing and go, okay, oh, this kid has that birthmark that everyone in that line has. I wonder. So yeah, it's a typical chosen one type narrative, but it's fine. So the main character is Garyon. He starts off, he's about 9 years old. For the first few chapters, he's little, and just kind of introducing the world. His Aunt Pole, who is his guardian caretaker, he has lived with her for as long as he remembers. They live on a farm, and she's like basically the head cook, and also kind of she runs things on the farm for the farmer. And there's also this character called the Old Wolf, and he is an old storyteller who comes into town from time to time every few years or so. And not a whole lot happens, and then it's about 5 years later. The Old Wolf comes back and is talking to Gerion's Aunt Pole and says, hey, this thing has been stolen and we have to go chase after it. Oh, you can leave him here. He'll be fine. And Aunt Pole's like, nah, he's going to get in trouble. He's starting to look at chicks. And he's kind of promised to another. They're all vague and crap about it, but he's promised to another. And if he starts hanging out with this chick, they're really traditional. So, if he does anything with her, they're going to get married. And then we're going to have to wait forever for circumstances to be appropriate again, because apparently there's a prophecy of some kind. We don't know what this prophecy is, but I assume it has to do with Gerion, and they want to make him marry a certain person to fulfill the prophecy now instead of having to wait again. So they decide to set out to search for this object, which is obviously the orb. Somebody has stolen the orb again. And it's like, okay, somebody's stolen the orb and they're chasing after it. You don't know this until later in the novel, but you know it because it's really obvious. And it's kind of just a big, long journey story. They're really typical in fantasy, even sci-fi, where it's like you're just going to different places and certain things happen and you're just going to certain places. And this novel is very much sort of a setup type novel. Not a lot really happens in it. They're just kind of going from place to place looking for the person who stole the orb. But what you find out is that the Old Wolf is this really ancient sorcerer called Belgariad. He was the first disciple of the god who created this orb. And sorcerers they can live for basically forever. And Aunt Pole is actually Polgara, who is Belgariad's daughter. And she has also lived for a very long time. And so they have been protecting the line that is supposed to be able to hold this orb and do things with it, because after the line was supposedly destroyed, not all of them were, and so they've spent their lives protecting this line. And Gerion's parents were killed in an attempt to steal him away, but fortunately they were able to save Gerion, but they weren't able to save his parents. So he's been raised since a baby, by his Aunt Pole. And they are related. It's just very, very distantly related. So you find out who they are and what their mission is to try and find the orb. And you find out a little bit about the magic. Mostly, if you will it so, it should happen if your will is strong enough. If you tell something to burn, it should burn if your will is strong enough. That sort of thing. It's a very interesting magic system. They just touched on it a little bit. They did a lot more in here about the world building and all of that. So many names. They were throwing names at you in the prologue in the first chapter. And I was like, because all the different sort of races, they're just people who live in certain areas. They tell you all the names and the names of different gods and all this other stuff. And I'm going, oh my God, this is such old school fantasy. It's ridiculous. You eventually get the hang of it, but oh my goodness. So for what I actually thought about this book, I actually liked it. You might be thinking from like, oh, it's the chosen one, and it's just sort of an adventure. They're traveling and they're searching for a MacGuffin. Maybe, oh yeah, that doesn't sound that interesting, but I think I like it because I like the characters. There's a decent sized cast of characters. The main three are Garion, Polgara, and Belgariad. Those are the three main characters, but they have a couple of friends around them, and it's not like too many where it's just huge casts. At some point they have a lot of people, but mostly it's just a few. And they're very interesting, and I'm curious about the world that has been built. It doesn't just feel like a European analog, because you get that a lot in a lot of fantasy novels where the world is just an analog for something else. The Kushiel's Dart series in particular is just an analog for England and France and like Italy and all that. Even the map just looks like Europe. They just call it different things. In this one, though, there's actually nicely drawn maps. And they detail where things are, and it's like, okay, it's just this big continent type thing. And it's very interesting. I like the world that they have set up, and they haven't really revealed a whole lot as far as what this actual prophecy is, how the magic, what the limitations of the magic are, how it works, and things like that. They've explained a little bit about that. And they try to explain a little bit more about that at the beginning of the second novel, which I've started to read. But mostly, you get a little hint of things, and it's enough to want me to keep going. I think if this had been written today, this novel would have been much larger. They would have probably put like the first couple novels together, because epic, this is epic fantasy, but not an epic fantasy novel. Like, it's not, 800 pages long. It's 250 pages. I mean, the font is tiny. It's little, but it's not super long. So it's probably only like 90 to 100,000 words. It's not super long. So it's a pretty quick read. I finished reading this. I read it over 2 days. I could have finished it in a day, but I wanted to save a little bit of it for the next day, and I finished it. They're definitely very quick reads. From what I've read, it seems like these were really popular as like teenage boys back in the day. That was kind of the target audience, I guess. Although, I mean, these are just marketed as regular fantasy novels, but it seems like something that teenage boys would like. Maybe not today, but definitely more back in the day, where it's a teenage boy. Garion is 14, almost 15 by the end of the novel. And he's going through these adventures and figuring things out and slowly learning about his past, because he doesn't know a whole lot about his past by the end of this. And it's fun. He's slowly learning how to do different things and get more powerful. What I like, so you can definitely tell that Garion is going to learn a whole lot of skills and be really powerful at some point. But they do it very organically, which is surprising, especially for a book that's not that long. They're on this journey, and they don't have a lot to do for parts of it. And so the friends that are traveling with them, Garion's bored, so they're like, hey, you wanna learn something? And he's learning this like secret hand language thing. And the other person starts to teach him how to use a sword. And at some point he's going to learn magic. Because, I think he has the potential already. But it doesn't feel like this guy is going to be super overpowered and just a Gary Stew and a horrible character. It actually feels more organic and interesting. So, yeah. I actually like this. I think I would definitely recommend this. I definitely think you should give it a read and see if it's something you might like. It's definitely more traditional type fantasy, not Tolkien-esque, but more kind of your traditional fantasy type thing. It's not graphic. There's some fighting and things like that, but they keep it very sort of toned down in a lot of places, and that could be just because it's the first novel, who knows, but I don't think it gets like super intense like a Game of Thrones type thing. And now, don't get me wrong, I love Game of Thrones. I did reviews of all the books, but it's kind of nice just to sit and read a normal fantasy novel once in a while. So yeah, I would recommend this. Give it a read, see if you like it. There are 10 of these novels, and I think that's the complete series. He's written others, but I think this and The Malorian are the entire series. So that'd be nice to have a good series in a little, set. So that was my review of Pawn of Prophecy, the first novel of the Belgariad series. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to follow what novels I am currently reading, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at author M.E. Kennedy, or follow the hashtag #OneYearOfBooks. I post what I'm currently reading. I also post other, random stuff on Twitter too. But you can, follow me if you like. You don't have to. You can just check it out. But I go over, what books I'm currently reading. I will probably be a few ahead of where, one book a week, because I read fairly quickly. But then, of course, when the holidays are coming up, I'll probably get, backlogged and things like that will happen. So I'll be happy that I'm a couple ahead. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any questions or comments or any book recommendations, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.